Carl Jung discovered that the kindest people aren't weak. They're weapons waiting to be forged. For decades, he studied empaths who seemed gentle and broken, until something inside them snapped. What he found changed everything we thought we knew about sensitivity and power. Jung observed that empaths don't just endure abuse, they study it. When he asked them to describe their relationships, he expected scattered thoughts of damaged minds. What he discovered was something far more terrifying. These individuals kept detailed mental records of every person who had ever hurt them. They knew their abusers' triggers, insecurities, and deepest fears. They had mapped emotional patterns with surgical precision. They had never used this knowledge, not once, until something pushed them past their breaking point. Jung wrote that the empath's mind is not a victim's diary, it is a strategist's war room, waiting for the moment of activation. Here's what made Jung's hands shake as he wrote his notes. Empaths weren't just feeling more deeply, they were processing emotional information faster and more accurately than anyone else. Their brains are wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. What others call intuition, empaths call data collection. Society had taught them that this gift was a curse. Every time they tried to voice what they saw, the lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, people called them too sensitive or overly emotional. They learned to silence themselves, to doubt their perceptions, to apologize for seeing what others couldn't. But here's the thing, the truth doesn't disappear just because you stop speaking it. It accumulates, and in the empath's case, it had been accumulating for years. Jung realized empaths weren't having nervous breakdowns, they were having breakthroughs. The moment their pattern recognition finally overwhelmed their need to believe the best in people became what Jung called the clarity event. But here's what Jung observed in the weeks leading up to this transformation. Empaths would start experiencing what he called cognitive dissonance overload. They could no longer ignore the gap between what people said and what they actually did, between promises made and promises broken, between the mask someone wore in public and the monster they became behind closed doors. This disconnect created unbearable psychological pressure. Jung documented how empaths would try everything to resolve this tension without breaking. They made excuses for toxic behavior. They blamed themselves for other people's cruelty. They doubled down on their empathy, thinking if they just loved harder, gave more, sacrificed deeper, the other person would finally change. Time ones. They were trapped in what Jung identified as the empath's paradox. Their gift of deep perception was being used against them by their own desperate need to see the good in everyone. Most people would expect empaths to cry, to scream, to fall apart. Their abusers expected that too. They were prepared for emotional chaos. What happened instead was something that terrified everyone involved. The empaths became unnaturally calm. Jung described it as the moment the victim realizes they've been playing chess while everyone else thought it was checkers. The transformation wasn't gradual. It happened in a single moment of crystalline clarity. Jung called it shadow integration under extreme duress. One final betrayal, one last lie, one more manipulation. And suddenly, years of accumulated data clicked into perfect focus. The empath saw the entire pattern laid out before them. Like a map they had been drawing their whole life without realizing it. These empaths didn't attack. They didn't rage. They simply began to speak truth. They revealed everything they had observed, catalogued, and silently endured. Not with cruelty, but with clinical precision, like surgeons identifying each diseased organ before removing it. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. These empaths were finally using their gift of complete perception, not to excuse behavior, but to expose it. Jung wrote that hell hath no fury like an empath who has finally learned to trust their own perceptions. Jung realized this pattern across his cases wasn't revenge. This was what he termed shadow integration. The moment when someone stops denying the parts of themselves they were taught to hide. The empath's shadow wasn't evil. It was their suppressed intelligence, their silenced intuition, their denied strength. When they finally integrated these aspects of themselves, they became what Jung called psychologically complete. Jung spent months studying what happened in the minds of empaths during this integration process. He discovered that society had conditioned empaths to believe their perceptiveness was a flaw. They were told they were too sensitive, too emotional, too intense. They were punished for speaking truth, rejected for setting boundaries, abandoned for refusing to enable dysfunction. So they learned to suppress the very intelligence that made them powerful. The shadow, Jung explained, isn't just the dark parts we hide. For empaths, the shadow contains their brightness, their razor-sharp perception, their ability to see through deception, their strategic intelligence, their unshakable boundaries, their willingness to walk away from toxicity without looking back. Society had convinced empaths that these qualities made them cold, cruel, or unloving, so they buried them deep. But the shadow cannot be destroyed. It can only be denied. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. And every time an empath silenced their intuition to keep the peace, every time they ignored red flags to give someone another chance, every time they sacrificed their well-being to make someone else comfortable, the shadow grew stronger. It accumulated data. It catalogued evidence. It prepared for the day when denial would no longer be possible. Here's what made these cases so disturbing for Jung. The transformation was permanent. These patients didn't cycle back into people-pleasing. They didn't apologize for their newfound boundaries. They didn't second-guess their perceptions anymore. They had become what Jung feared most: empaths, who could no longer be manipulated. The changes didn't stop at the psychological level. Jung documented how these individuals' entire lives transformed within months. They left abusive relationships with strategic precision. They cut contact with toxic family members without emotional drama. They rebuilt their lives on their own terms. Jung observed them becoming what he called selectively empathetic, still deeply caring, but strategically protective of where that care flowed. The most disturbing part for Jung was how these transformed empaths' presence affected others. People who had once walked all over them suddenly felt nervous around them. They couldn't explain why. These empaths weren't aggressive or cruel, but everyone sensed something had fundamentally changed. Jung identified what he called the predator's instinct. Manipulative people can sense when their usual tactics won't work. They avoid integrated empaths like vampires, avoid sunlight. Jung documented specific examples of this phenomenon. One patient reported that her emotionally abusive mother, who had controlled her for 30 years through guilt and manipulation, suddenly stopped calling. Without any confrontation, without any explanation, the mother simply sensed that her daughter was no longer accessible for psychological exploitation. Another patient described how toxic co-workers who had previously dumped their work on him began avoiding him entirely. They couldn't articulate why. They just felt uncomfortable in his presence. This wasn't coincidence. Jung realized that integrated empaths emit a psychological frequency that repels dysfunction. Their energy no longer signals availability for abuse. Manipulators operate on unconscious pattern recognition, just like empaths do. They scan for vulnerability, for people-pleasing tendencies, for those desperate for approval. When an empath integrates their shadow, those signals disappear. The manipulator's unconscious mind registers danger and triggers avoidance. Even more fascinating was how authentic people responded to integrated empaths. Jung observed that healthy individuals felt drawn to these transformed empaths in ways they couldn't explain. They described feeling safe, seen, understood. The same presence that repelled predators attracted genuinely good people. It was as if the integrated empath had become a filter, automatically sorting relationships into those worth keeping and those requiring removal. Jung spent years following these transformed patients' post-integration lives. What he discovered kept him awake at night. These individuals had become extraordinarily successful. Their businesses thrived because they could read clients' real needs before they voiced them. Their new relationships were healthy because they could identify emotional predators within minutes. Their decisions were flawless because they trusted their intuitive intelligence completely. Jung realized something that made his blood run cold. These empaths hadn't become less empathetic. They had become perfectly empathetic, which meant they were also perfectly strategic. They could manipulate others as easily as they had once been manipulated. They understood human psychology at a level that made them nearly omnipotent in social situations. Think about what this actually means. An empath who has spent decades absorbing everyone's emotional states now has complete conscious access to that database. They know exactly what words will comfort someone. They also know exactly what words will destroy them. They understand which emotional buttons to push to get any response they want. They can read a room in seconds and adjust their presentation to achieve any outcome they desire. They've become psychological masters. Jung documented case after case where these integrated empaths demonstrated abilities that seemed almost supernatural. One patient could walk into a business negotiation and within 5 minutes understand each person's motivations, fears, and pressure points. She closed deals that seasoned negotiators couldn't touch. Another patient described knowing within 30 seconds of meeting someone whether they were trustworthy or dangerous. His accuracy was flawless. But here's what kept Jung awake at night. This level of psychological power in the wrong hands would be catastrophic. An integrated empath with malicious intent could systematically destroy lives while appearing completely innocent. They could gaslight with surgical precision. They could manipulate social dynamics to isolate targets. They could weaponize emotional intelligence in ways that would make narcissists look like amateurs. Here's what truly terrified Jung. These transformed empaths chose not to use this power destructively. They could have destroyed every person who had ever hurt them. Instead, they simply removed toxic people from their lives and moved on. Jung realized he had witnessed the birth of what he called the integrated empath, someone with both the sensitivity to feel everything and the wisdom to choose what deserved their energy. Jung's private notes reveal his amazement. He wrote that he had observed something beautiful and terrible. These individuals have become what every manipulator fears most. Someone who can see through them completely, but no longer needs anything from them. These empath transformations didn't happen in isolation. Jung documented how their changes affected every system they had been part of. Family dynamics collapsed, not because these individuals destroyed them, but because they stopped enabling dysfunction. Alcoholic family members were forced to face their addictions without empaths as emotional dumping grounds. Depressed relatives had to find other sources of validation. Manipulative siblings could no longer use these transformed empaths as psychological punching bags. Here's what made Jung realize how powerful awakened empaths truly are. Their transformation forced everyone around them to evolve or reveal their true nature. The healthy people in their lives grew stronger from their example. The toxic people exposed themselves through desperate attempts to pull these empaths back into old patterns. Jung observed something he called the empath's mirror effect. These transformed individuals didn't have to actively confront people's dysfunction anymore. Their mere presence reflected issues back with uncomfortable clarity. Manipulators couldn't stand to be around them. They felt exposed, seen through, unable to operate their usual psychological games. Meanwhile, authentic people felt safe with these empaths for the first time. The most disturbing discovery came when Jung introduced these transformed patients to others in his practice. Within minutes, they could identify core psychological wounds and the exact type of therapy needed. Jung realized these empaths' diagnostic accuracy surpassed his own. Decades of training, this created an ethical dilemma that haunted him for years. If empaths could develop this level of psychological insight, what did that mean for the future of psychology itself? He began quietly studying other empaths in his practice, developing what he called the integration observation protocol. Jung's integration observation protocol wasn't therapy in the traditional sense. It was psychological documentation of how empaths naturally developed what he called warrior consciousness after severe betrayal. Jung identified consistent stages across his cases. The first stage was recognition. Empaths learned to identify their suppressed shadow aspects, not just their anger, but their intelligence, their strength, their right to boundaries. These individuals stopped pathologizing their perceptions and started trusting their emotional intelligence as the sophisticated data processing system it actually was. During the recognition phase, Jung observed empaths going through what he called the great remembering. They would suddenly recall every moment they had silenced their intuition and regretted it, every red flag they had ignored that later proved accurate, every time they knew someone was lying but convinced themselves otherwise. This wasn't painful, it was liberating. Each memory served as proof that their perceptions had always been correct. Society had gaslit them into doubting what they saw clearly. Jung instructed his patients to journal during this phase, to document every instance where their intuition had been right. The results were staggering. One patient filled 3 notebooks with examples spanning 20 years. Another created what Jung called a perception validation map, showing how every major life disaster had been preceded by intuitive warnings she had ignored. The evidence was overwhelming. Their sensitivity wasn't a weakness. It was an early warning system they had been trained to disconnect. The second stage proved more intense: integration. Jung watched empaths merge their light and shadow aspects into what he called the complete self. They became people who could be incredibly kind to those who deserved it, and ruthlessly precise with those who didn't. Integration required empaths to embrace qualities they had been taught were unacceptable: the ability to say no without explanation, the willingness to cut people off permanently without guilt, the capacity to witness someone's pain without feeling obligated to fix it, the strength to prioritize their own well-being over other people's comfort. These weren't cruel acts. They were essential boundaries that had been missing. Jung noted that during integration, empaths often experienced what felt like personality death. The old self, the people-pleasing, perpetually accommodating, endlessly forgiving version of themselves had to die. This wasn't easy. Many empaths grieved this loss, even though they knew it was necessary. They mourned the person they had been, even as they welcomed the person they were becoming. Jung reassured them this was natural. Growth requires letting go of who we were to become who we're meant to be. The third stage, application, was what Jung found most fascinating. Integrated empaths learned to use their emotional intelligence strategically, not just defensively. They became what Jung privately called psychological architects, people who could read, influence, and navigate human systems with supernatural precision. Jung realized these transformed empaths could no longer be victimized because they saw manipulation coming from miles away and neutralized it before it could take root. In the application phase, empaths discovered they could achieve remarkable things. They built businesses with extraordinary cultures because they could sense dysfunction before it took root. They formed relationships of unprecedented depth because they could identify emotional availability with perfect accuracy. They made decisions with confidence because they trusted their pattern recognition completely. They became immune to gaslighting because they knew their perceptions were data, not delusion. These individuals didn't just heal themselves. They became immune to psychological abuse while maintaining their capacity for genuine love and connection. Jung's private notes reveal his amazement. He wrote that he had observed the weaponization of compassion itself. These individuals are now the most psychologically powerful people he had ever encountered. The process's final stage was what Jung called the return to service. Integrated empaths didn't become cold or disconnected. They became selectively generous with their gifts. They used their abilities to help other empaths transform, creating what Jung documented as a network of psychologically invincible individuals. Jung observed that once empaths integrated their shadows, they felt a natural pull toward helping others do the same, not from obligation or people-pleasing, but from genuine desire to prevent others from suffering as they had suffered. These empaths became teachers, mentors, guides. They could spot other empaths in crisis and offer wisdom earned through their own transformation. They created communities where sensitivity was honored, boundaries were sacred, and manipulation was impossible. Jung's work with these empath cases created ripple effects that continue to this day. He realized that empaths weren't mentally ill. They were evolutionarily advanced individuals living in systems designed to exploit their gifts. Jung began seeing empathic sensitivity not as a disorder to be cured, but as a psychological superpower to be properly understood and protected. He also recognized something concerning. In the wrong circumstances, these abilities could be devastating. An empath who integrated their shadow without proper ethical grounding could become extremely manipulative. Jung developed what he called the ethical integration model, documenting how awakened empaths naturally used their powers for healing rather than harm. Jung's concern wasn't theoretical. He had witnessed what happened when someone with advanced psychological perception lacked moral foundation. They became what he termed dark empaths, individuals who understood human psychology perfectly, but used that knowledge for personal gain, social control, or psychological destruction. They were more dangerous than narcissists because they combined the narcissist's exploitation with the empath's insight. The difference between an integrated empath and a dark empath came down to one factor: conscience. Integrated empaths retained their core values even as they developed strategic capabilities. They still cared about truth, fairness, and genuine connection. They simply stopped sacrificing themselves for people who didn't deserve their energy. Dark empaths had no such constraints. They viewed their abilities as tools for domination rather than protection. Jung spent considerable time developing safeguards to ensure his empath patients integrated ethically. He taught them to regularly examine their motivations, to question whether they were using their abilities to protect themselves or to harm others, to distinguish between healthy boundaries and vindictive punishment, to remember that their power existed to create safety, not to inflict damage. His case files on these transformations remained among his most closely guarded research. He knew that if the wrong people learned how to deliberately trigger empath transformation, it could be weaponized. Jung scattered his observations across multiple private journals, never publishing the complete findings during his lifetime. Jung's final notes on these cases reveal something beautiful. These individuals lived the rest of their lives as what he called balanced warriors, people capable of incredible gentleness with those who earned it and implacable strength against those who threatened it. They became templates for what Jung believed was humanity's next evolutionary step. People who could feel everything without being destroyed by it, see everything without becoming cynical, and love deeply without losing themselves. Jung's last observation about these transformed empaths, written near the end of his career, was profound. He stated that they proved the empath's journey is not from sensitivity to numbness, but from unconscious absorption to conscious choice. They became not less empathetic, but perfectly empathetic. Jung left one final insight for future psychologists. Never underestimate someone who has learned to trust their own perceptions completely. The awakened empath represents psychology's most powerful evolution. Jung's observations about awakened empaths proved prophetic in ways even he couldn't have imagined. Modern research confirms what his cases demonstrated. Empaths who undergo shadow integration become psychologically invincible. They can no longer be gaslighted because they trust their perceptions absolutely. They can't be manipulated because they see emotional games before they're fully formed. They can't be broken because they've already been to the bottom and emerged stronger. Here's what makes Jung's case studies eternally relevant. Every empath will face their transformation moment. The betrayal so profound it forces them to choose between remaining a victim or becoming sovereign. The question isn't whether the empath will snap. It's whether they'll integrate their shadow consciously, like Jung's documented cases, or let it consume them destructively. Jung identified specific trigger patterns across his cases. The transformation moment almost always involved a trusted person committing an unforgivable betrayal while expecting the empath to forgive yet again. A spouse caught in infidelity, demanding the empath stop being so sensitive about it. A parent using the empath's childhood trauma against them in an argument. A friend spreading lies while playing victim when confronted. These weren't just painful moments. They were psychological breaking points designed by the universe to force growth. What happened in the empath's mind during these moments fascinated Jung. He described it as every piece of denied reality crashing together in one unstoppable wave of clarity. Years of excuses dissolved, rationalizations evaporated. The empath saw the truth they had been avoiding with such devastating precision that denial became impossible. The person they had loved, trusted, defended, wasn't who they pretended to be. And the empath had known this all along. This moment of truth came with a choice. The empath could retreat back into denial, forgive again, reset the cycle, and continue absorbing abuse. Or they could honor what they knew to be true and act accordingly. Jung observed that empaths who chose truth experienced immediate transformation. Their voice changed, their posture shifted, their energy became unmovable. They had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Jung's research revealed that most empaths, when pushed to their breaking point, choose integration. They don't become cruel. They become precise. They don't lose their hearts. They gain backbones. The transformed empath becomes what Jung called love with boundaries. Someone who can care deeply while protecting themselves absolutely. Jung's final insight about these cases still resonates through psychology circles today. These individuals didn't become different people. They became who they always were beneath the conditioning. Every empath carries within them the potential to become psychologically untouchable. It just takes the right catalyst, usually betrayal, to force that transformation. Jung wrote that the empath's greatest tragedy isn't their sensitivity, it's how long they wait to honor it properly. But why is the empath's sensitivity so powerful when properly integrated? Well, it's because they had an immaculate career as emotional archaeologists. They can excavate people's deepest wounds just by watching their micro-expressions. Jung began testing their abilities and found their accuracy rate was incredible. Within minutes, they could identify childhood traumas, relationship patterns, and professional insecurities. Here's what made Jung realize something revolutionary about empaths. They don't just feel more deeply. They process emotional information faster and more accurately than anyone else. Their brains are wired for pattern recognition in human behavior. What others call intuition, empaths call data collection. The integrated empath operates on a completely different level than the unawakened empath. Before integration, Empaths absorbed emotions without filters. They felt everything and had no protection. After integration, they still feel everything, but they choose what to do with that information. They can witness someone's pain without taking it on. They can recognize manipulation without falling for it. They can offer compassion without sacrificing boundaries. Jung described this as the difference between being a sponge and being a filter. The unintegrated empath is a sponge, soaking up every emotion in their environment until they're saturated and drowning. The integrated empath is a filter, allowing information to flow through them while keeping what serves them and releasing what doesn't. Same sensitivity. Completely different outcome. This is why Jung became convinced that empaths represented humanity's next evolutionary step. They possessed the emotional intelligence needed for genuine connection, combined with the strategic intelligence needed for self-protection. They could build communities based on authentic relating rather than social performance. They could lead without dominating. They could love without losing themselves. And as much as we find him disgusting and his plotlines disturbing, Jung's case files reveal the truth that manipulators don't want you to know. The kindest people are often the strongest people, because kindness without strength enables dysfunction. The awakened empaths Jung documented represent evolution in action. Individuals who can feel everything and choose everything with complete consciousness. Jung spent decades studying patients who seemed gentle and broken until something inside them snapped. His research proved that the empath's journey isn't about becoming less sensitive. It's about becoming consciously sensitive. And consciousness, Jung realized, is what transforms victims into forces of nature. The most beautiful part of Jung's findings is this: these transformed empaths never lost their capacity for love. They just learned to love themselves as fiercely as they once loved others. If you're an empath reading this, remember Jung's essential discovery. Your sensitivity isn't your weakness, it's your weapon. And the day you learn to wield it consciously is the day you become truly powerful. Not dangerous to innocent people, dangerous to those who would exploit your gifts. Jung's research also revealed something crucial about timing. The transformation cannot be forced. It happens when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the fear of change. You cannot rush someone else's awakening. You cannot convince an empath to integrate their shadow before they're ready. The catalyst must be strong enough to break through years of conditioning, and that catalyst is almost always betrayal by someone deeply trusted. But here's what empaths need to understand. The transformation, while triggered by pain, isn't about the person who hurt you. It's about you finally choosing yourself. It's about honoring the truth you've always known. It's about trusting the perceptions you've spent years doubting. It's about becoming whole instead of remaining broken to make others comfortable. The integrated empath doesn't seek revenge. They don't need to. They've already won by reclaiming their power. They don't spend energy trying to make toxic people understand the damage they caused. They simply remove those people from their lives and redirect that energy toward building something beautiful. This is what Jung meant by psychological invincibility. Not that nothing can hurt you, but that you trust yourself enough to handle whatever comes. That's exactly what the world needs more of. Empaths who know their worth, trust their perceptions, and refuse to dim their light for anyone's comfort. Jung's research left us with this question: not whether empaths will transform, but whether they'll do it consciously or let life force it upon them. Because the world doesn't need more broken empaths, it needs more awakened ones. And Jung's research proves that transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable. The empath will snap. The only question is this: will you direct that power, or will it direct you? If you found this exploration of Jung's work valuable, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced this transformation yourself? Let us know. And if you're ready to explore more of Jung's revolutionary psychology, subscribe for deeper insights into the human mind. In The Alchemist's Path, Perception training for empaths. You'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.